You probably know a young child who's going to school emotional and hungry every day. How do I know that? Because millions of parents are neglecting their children because they're in active addiction. Let me describe what that looks like. Addie, a first grader, was going to school in shoes 2 sizes too small, so they wouldn't fit on her feet. Her clothes were 3 sizes too big, so she walked around holding her pants up. And her hair was often in knots, so her teacher would brush it for her. She complained that she didn't have dinner the night before or breakfast. And one day she cried about a car accident. So her teacher called Child Protective Services, but nothing changed. And then her teacher called me. Addie is my granddaughter. For years, her and her sister were in and out of our care because their parents, my son Ryan and his wife, suffered a substance use disorder. But every time I thought they had recovered, I would send the girls home, empowering their parents to raise them. But this time was different. I was angry. These were my granddaughters. Shortly after we took guardianship, I felt like a hero. Picture me with a long cape and a Wonder Woman costume. Okay, maybe not. The hero status faded quickly when I realized our retirement was over. No more golf, pickleball, or impromptu love sessions with my husband. In that moment, this is what I thought. My son and his wife are liars. They're weak. They're never going to amount to anything. They're never going to recover. They're going to die. Our granddaughters are going to live with us until they graduate from high school. I must have been a terrible mother. None of those thoughts were true. None. 0, zip. But like millions of others, I believe the stigma of addiction, the stigma that buries our hope, that stops us from putting our energy in productive places, and it makes us think our loved ones will never recover. A friend of mine says, you know, Michelle, you can be the victim or the victor and do something to mend your broken family. And I was like, well, who does she think she is? This wasn't my problem. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. Who's not sleeping at night? Who has a panic attack every time she hears a siren? And who's parenting children again? Yeah, this was my problem. I dropped my hero cape and stomped on it and pulled up my sleeves because I had work to do. Shoulding, S-H-O-U-L-D, and shaming my son, that wasn't working. That wasn't connecting. I needed to find a way to help. We have an epidemic in the United States. Millions of grandparents are raising grandchildren. In 2021, over 100,000 people died from a substance use overdose. And every year we lose 95,000 people to alcohol-related deaths. We need to stop thinking that we can't do anything and stop our stigma thoughts and start finding ways to keep our loved ones alive. Have you seen any of these new roundabouts in your community? They're designed to help the flow of traffic, reduce accidents, and relieve congested areas. And they work really well as long as a person knows when to yield and where to exit, right? But if you're like me, you know, I've seen people drive up to them and they're like, oh, where do I go? And then some go the wrong way. And then some go in and they just keep going round and round. They don't know where to exit. Well, when we have a loved one in active addiction, they're in that cycle. They're in a circle, and it goes like this. They crave their substance, they act on it, there's this momentary relief, And then afterward, they feel guilty. They feel like they let their family down. They become depressed. They can't cope, and they use again. And they stay in that cycle. And the family is over in their other roundabout, in their own roundabout. They're so disappointed and angry at their loved ones that it's just easier to just detach or sometimes abandon them. But as they're in there, they start feeling guilty and maybe a little pity. And they do one of two things. Some go over there and they're like, oh, I'm going to show them which way to go, how to exit. And they become like bumper cars, cramming into them. And their loved ones feel rejected. They crash into the curb. They're misunderstood. And then they feel really ashamed that they disappointed their family. And other family members start feeling really pity for this person when they do something wrong and they take responsibility for their loved one's actions. And there's this momentary relief. Everybody's happy, but it doesn't last, because when the loved one uses again, the family feels manipulated, like they intentionally did it to irritate the family, to get back at the family. And then society, they're in their own little circle. They're not sure whose advice to take. It's just easier to stay and believe in their stigma than it is to learn about the neuroscience of the disease. Well, if we all stay in our own roundabout, how do we ever connect? How do we ever find a solution to the problem? I said to my husband, what is our best case scenario? He's like, I don't know. I said, well, we got to pray. We got to pray that Ryan and his wife choose a recovery option, that they get into a sober life, they get jobs, and they reestablish guardianship of their daughters. That's our prize. That's what we've got to fight for. And at first he rolled his eyes, but then he was kind of leaning in. I think he was thinking about some impromptu love sessions. And I said, well, what if we look at this like it's nobody's fault? It's nobody's fault. It'll just eliminate all the guilt and shame. And what if we stop thinking, believing all those things that we used to think about addiction and look at them like they had cancer? We would find the best evidence-based recovery options for them, wouldn't we? He's like, yeah, but they're not going to listen to us. And I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe not. But if we put the resources together and we empower and encourage them to make their own choices, and we empathize with where they are in their problem, they'll feel like we're on their team. And what if we teach their daughters about the neuroscience so they no longer feel abandoned or rejected? That's not what this is about. And what if we let go of needing to be right? Isn't it more important to connect than it is to be right? And my husband nodded, because that's what he does when he knows I'm right. We did all these things. We changed our mindset, and Ryan and his wife chose a rehab. We helped them get there. We celebrated when they were 30, 60, and 90 days sober. We homeschooled their girls so we could relocate to where they were and keep their relationship going. We watched as they transitioned into sober living arrangements. And they used up all their working dollars to pay for it, even though it smelled like mold and there were cockroaches. And we applauded them. And one day my daughter-in-law said, I remember the exact place I was standing when I finally felt like you were no longer ashamed of us. When you were on our team. And things were going so well. And then we got a call. Ryan tested positive for fentanyl. And my granddaughter said, Mimi, just adopt us. We don't ever want to go back. I refused to give up hope. I put them in trauma therapy, and I held them when they cried. And when they shared their haunted stories, I cried. And together, we grieve for the childhood that we wish they'd had. But I went to my son and I said, I love you. Reoccurrences, they happen in recovery. But I believe in you, and I am on your team, and we are here to support you, and get back in it. And a year later, they returned home to our hometown, got jobs, found a place to rent. And yesterday, he texted me, and he said, Mom, I'm 4 years sober today. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And now he's on my team. We're on each other's team. They share their story on their own, but through me too. See, when we look at addiction differently, we can gain new perspectives. We become more curious. We're able to look within before casting judgment out. That roundabout has only one exit. It's always to the right, by the way. But the recovery options and exit strategies for families is never just one way. It's different for every person. Our job is to let them take responsibility for their actions, but respect the direction they want to go, even if we feel like it's the wrong way. Because, see, when we connect, we're not saying we agree with their substance use. We are saying that we see our person beneath the ugly symptoms of the disease, enough to know they are worth our fight. We all have a choice. We can choose to go into the roundabout and kick our loved ones to the curb, trying to get them to do what we want them to do, or we can just abandon them. Or we can find ways to connect by respecting the direction they want to go. And meet them right where they are. And hopefully that's going to be right into a loving embrace. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.